Emalee. Welcome to the podcast today. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so Emalee Merrell, and you work at the Department of Education. And this is a conversation that I've really been looking forward to because I actually saw you on social media. And then I reached out to you and you were like, okay, who is this person? So first, I just want to say thanks for taking a chance on me.
Yeah, absolutely. This will be fun.
And then also, before we dive into this, I want to say thanks for braving the weather to be here. We all woke up to a bunch of snow, school is canceled, and I was actually really surprised to get your email that you were like, hey, I'm still up for today. Can you make it? And I was like, whoa, she's not canceling on this with this weather.
Dedicated.
I saw you and I was like, whoa, were you born and raised in Idaho?
I was. I'm one of those rare unicorns, born and raised not just in Idaho, but here in the Treasure Valley. So my big move in life was about 8 miles from my dad's house to my married house with my husband down Ustick Road. So very familiar with the snow. I don't love it, but familiar with it and know how to handle.
You know how to brave. Yeah. On the way before I came, Matt, my producer, was like, hey, be careful out there. There's some people in ditches. And I was like, okay. And as I was driving here, sure enough, there was a car in a ditch. There was a truck in a ditch. And as I was driving past the truck in the ditch, I had this flashback to I don't know, what year would it have been? 2018, I think. My family was living in Lewiston. And we lived down this country road. So not every day, but on a lot of days, I would drive my kids to the bus stop because it was about about a mile down the road. So there was a lot of snow one day, and we have, in Lewiston, they really just don't. It's actually kind of interesting. When I was on the school board up there, that was the first time they ever had a snow day.
Oh, wow.
They called a snow day. So anyways, there's snow out. It's it might have been probably a 2-hour delay. And I'm like, okay, I'll just take the kids to the bus stop. One of my kids had already gone to school. I had 2 elementary schools and then a toddler, 3.5-year-old with me. So I'm like, okay, kids, we have our 6-seater Dodge, pickup truck. It's red because it fits everyone in the car. Right. And I'm like, well, it's not going to be that long, right? So I'm seriously in my slippers, pajamas, and a sweatshirt, I think, and just throw my toddler in and we just go and we drive down the road, no problem, right? I'm there, the bus comes, the 2 kids get in the car. And then at the end of our road, it was, perpendicular to the main road. And so when you got to the main road, you could just loop around. There was a loop around that would take you back to our road. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. And the bus would often, that's what the bus used, but not today because it was a snow day, right? So the bus goes off and goes into the neighborhood and is picking up the other kids. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to take that loop around because I didn't want to turn around in the road, because there's all this snow and stuff. And so anyways, I go up to the main road, I turn right, I'm on the main road, and now I'm ready to hit that loop around. And I missed the road and went into the ditch. And our truck's really front heavy. And also, because it was going to be such a quick trip to the bus stop, I didn't bring my cell phone. So I'm in this truck with my slippers on and my toddler and no cell phone. And I was like, shoot, this is a bummer. And so I was just the good fortune, it was such a blessing. A neighbor drives by in his truck and he's like, I'll help you get out. And 20 minutes later, I was out and I was like, bless Idaho. God bless Idaho. I just just neighbor helping neighbor. And I was home within 20 minutes.
Nice. See, if you'd brought your cell phone and you'd been in snow pants and boots, it wouldn't have happened. But it was just because you went in your slippers and didn't have your phone that it happened. It's just kind of how it works.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Anyways, my fun snow story for the morning. So thank you for being here. I'm all cuddled up in my sweater. It's Valentine's month. So I got my hearts on. I'm it's the month of Valentine's.
I love it. I got my pink fingernails ready for it.
I saw those. I love they're so pretty.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. So the thing that I'm really looking forward to talking with you about today is kind of nerding out on learning.
Yeah.
I'm so pumped about it because this is something that's not just good for schools, even though that's what we're talking about. I just kind of feel this is just such great life quality stuff. Being a lifelong learner.
Yes.
I love it. So You work in the Department of Content and Curriculum,
Correct.
right? At the Department of Education. And I looked this up beforehand, and you are the coordinator for professional learning, right?
Yeah, professional learning communities and multi-tiered systems of support. It's a long title.
Multi-tiered systems of support.
Yes.
Okay, what's that?
It's intervention for students. So students who are struggling, but it's also for students who need enrichment. So it's part of the PLC process. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but PLC process of making sure students are learning at high levels. And some students have no problem with that and are ready to go to the next step. Other students are struggling. And so multi-tiered systems of support is how we get those students what they need at every level. And it is a system. It can't just be one teacher doing it or even a team of teachers at one grade level doing it. It has to be school-wide, and it has to be embedded within what you do at the school and things like your schedule. That's part of the system. Who's looking at data? That's part of the system. How often are you looking at data? So putting all of those pieces together through the PLC process.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Now, also, you are in every field, there are acronyms. And in education, we've got a lot of acronyms.
So many.
And so PLC is an acronym that has probably been around for a really long time, but has popped up pretty recent. I'm going to put air quotes around the room recently, right? More and more people, I think parents are starting to hear this and they're just like, what's a PLC, right? So I thought that it would be really great to for you to briefly explain what a PLC is and what it does for education, on that broad perspective.
Yeah. So a professional learning community, they've been around for about 25 years. But the research has just been increasing about how effective it is and how it's supporting students and staff. And so, yeah, we're hearing quite a bit more about it lately. I would say there's several school districts across Idaho who've been PLC schools or communities for a decade or more. And maybe the reason we're hearing more about it is because there is finally state support for that. So the position that I'm currently in was created just about a year and a half ago, which is when I took that position at the State Department. And so now there's support behind it at the state level and ways that we can help school districts implement this and build it and continue to work the system. So what it is, the definition is a group of teachers or a school working together to figure out what's working and what's not working and doing action research. So action research meaning try something, see if it works, collect data on it. If it did work, keep doing that. If it didn't work, let's go back to the drawing board and continue. So it's a continuous cycle to see if students are learning. And it's a mind shift. It's a shift from what's being taught in the classroom to what are students actually learning. So it could have been the best lesson that I've ever done and students were engaged and it was fun. And then I look at the data and I see, well, the students didn't actually understand the key concepts. So now I need to go back and do it again or do it a different way. Or maybe most of the kids got it, but about 5 or 6 didn't. So maybe I need to spend a little bit more time with those students. So they do that by answering 4 PLC questions. So the 4 PLC questions are, what do we want students to know and be able to do? How do we know that they can do it? What do we do if they struggle? And what do we do to enrich and extend for those students who already understand it and are ready for something more?
Oh, wow. I love that. It's I read this book about collaboration. And one of the things is a researcher who just solely focuses on collaboration. And she talked about how people think that they're collaborating all the time.
Right.
Oh, we're working together, so we're collaborating on this project. But she made this really valuable distinction that collaboration, when true collaboration occurs, people are aware of what they're doing. They're aware of what the goals are and where they want to go, right? And they're constantly checking in on that process. And so to me, when I hear your definition of PLCs, our professional learning communities, to me, it is a a type of collaboration, right? Where they're intentionally working on a thing. And I that almost sounds like funny to say, but it's really true. I think a lot of people do think that they're working together, and they are, but they think that that working together is collaboration. And that's like not actually, based on like, definitions by an expert, that's like not actually true. So anyways, that's really cool about the PLC.
Yeah, you'll hear in the PLC world, collaboration versus collaboration. Are we just talking, or are we talking with, like what you said, with a goal in mind? We're looking towards student learning. Did they learn the information? And so we have to always keep that goal in mind. And so a culture of collaboration is really important in a PLC. So is looking at results and to ensure that all students learn.
So when we're talking about, because I mean, one of the big things I hear in terms of education is like student outcomes.
Yes.
Right? Like we're talking about student outcomes. That's like, and so you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but like are PLCs incorporated to help improve student outcomes? Like through the questions, it sounds like that's what, the goal is there. But like, what are some of the goals of PLCs, or do each PLC, like little unit, determine what their goals are?
So PLC or a community in and of itself is kind of the umbrella term. So it kind of depends on what your community is. It could be a school district. The whole school district is creating this community, but it could also just start with the school. The school could be the community. And so, don't know where this is going. Hold on.
You're good. You're just fine. Sometimes, you know what? It's like early in the morning and it's like a snow day. And I think I asked like 3 or 4 questions in a row.
Right.
Like, so just in terms of like student outcomes, like professional learnings come to, those PLC come together for those student outcomes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the student outcomes are ultimately what we're working for. But I mentioned early, it's a system. So in this first year of state support, we're looking at changes in system. So we're looking for schools to have what's called a guiding coalition, different than a leadership team. So a leadership team often is just that, just your leadership, your principal, your assistant principal, and their focus tends to be on what's referred to as the 3 Bs: building, budgets, and buses. And on a day like today, where it's a snow day, those things are very important and they will always be important. But we're never going to move the needle on student success until we start talking about academics. So a guiding coalition is usually made up of that leadership team, but also your teacher leaders and maybe your counselor. And it's always going to be focused on student learning. So maybe your system change means that you are looking at instructional best practices. So when a principal or a teacher does a walkthrough of another teacher's classroom, they're looking for those instructional practices. It could be that you're looking for your curriculum materials. Do you have high quality curriculum materials that are meeting the standards? So it's a whole bunch of those systems changes. So really what we're looking for in kind of this implementation is, what are the system changes? We can't look at student data really in that first year until we get a solid foundation within our PLC. And of course, the teacher teams are looking at data. But as far as big picture, like say the ISATs, that's really eventually what we're going to be looking at. You might not see that in the first year. But what we have seen is that schools that focus on the system and those system changes tend to see those academic successes quicker than anticipated. And so that's really hopeful to see that.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about, I really like how you mentioned like the leadership team on the three Bs, and then you've got, this guided coalition over here, and they're focusing on different things. So it sounds like in that first year, like if, a school was like, hey, I want to have a PLC, that first year is about like assessing what's happening.
Yes.
Right. To make it so that after they look at the picture, then they can determine what they need to do with the picture.
Yeah, we talk about that quite a bit of we've got to be honest and real about our current reality. So what's our current reality? What are things that are working? What are things that aren't working? And being able to change those things that aren't working.
So Idaho, I'm trying to decide at this moment. Do we talk about the state context or the local? I almost want to start at the local context because it sounds like this is where it started first, was on the local context, and then the state incorporated your position. So
Yep.
okay, I've now decided. We're gonna go with local
Love it.
first. Okay. We're gonna go with local first. So like, do you know, I just always loved like the historical component. Do you know where like PLCs like initially popped up in Idaho?
In Idaho, no. Like I said, PLCs have been around for about 25 years, and they actually came from a school district in Illinois. That's where it started with Robert DeFore and his wife, Rebecca DeFore. They founded what's called Solution Tree, and they're the big corporation that's copyrighted professional learning communities. There's others that you can use and resources to use, but they're kind of the big ones. As far as here in Idaho, I don't know. I know the West Ada School District has been a PLC community for about a decade. They've implemented PLCs. Bonneville School District in eastern Idaho, as well as Pocatello, again, have probably been doing it for at least a dozen years. But you're right in that a lot of school districts are now starting to do it within the last, 5 years. Idaho has what's called our very first model PLC school, and that is from Lewiston. And if you talk to Lewiston, they've been doing it for about 5 years before they got that national recognition. And then in like the last month, we had our second nationally recognized school, which is from Shelley, Idaho. And they are what's called a promising practice school, where they get that national recognition for the work that they're doing around professional learning communities.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. So we've got some schools that have been doing it for a while, but Lewiston has only been doing it for 5 years. And then, they got that national recognition. So what does that mean? What does it mean they've been doing it for 5 years? And then what does it mean that they now have this national recognition?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Solution Tree does these national recognitions, and you have to submit evidence, paperwork, right? That you have been successfully implementing and improving student data for over 3 years. So that's a model PLC school. They can show continuous growth over a 3-year period within their overall school success, but also within those smaller demographics as well, that they've moved the needle with special education students, or they've moved the needle specifically with ELs. Shelley, which is a promising practice school. I'm not sure when they started doing PLCs, but I actually went and visited them as one of my very first visits of trying to see what PLC looks like in the state of Idaho. Their promising practice is that they've been showing that success for a year. So hopefully in 2 years, we'll see them as a model PLC school. And I know that there are so many other districts in the state who could submit paperwork and get that same national recognition. It's just whether they've gone through that process or not.
So I just want to break it down just a little bit more, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to Shelley, and we're talking about promising
practices.
Promising practices. So this means what? Tell me more specifically about what that actually means for what's happening for like teachers in that building who are participating in that, and they're like, right? Tell me what that means.
Yeah, so it means, like I said, that they've started making changes that have shown success for students. And again, it goes back to those systems. So some of the school districts that I've been working with, so this last year we were able to implement a grant, the PLC Schools grant. It was a competitive grant that 29 different schools or districts received, and it included an opportunity to go to a Solution Tree PLC conference to kind of get that basic learning, also to like light the fire for what we're doing, to then bring it back to that school. So what that looks like for the school itself, it means building in collaboration time for teacher teams. So how do we get, ultimately we want to have about 30 minutes a week, if we can get up to an hour every single week, that teachers are collaborating around student learning. That's best. It also includes professional development. Those teams that went to the conference are now bringing that back and bringing back their learning of what that looks like. So it's working in that cycle. So what do we want students to know and be able to do? That includes selecting the essential standards. So we use the Idaho content standards so that we get grade level standards, and we're reaching those grade level expectations. But there's a lot of standards, and we know that teachers don't have enough time to teach all of them, especially teaching them well in depth. So we select essential standards. So that doesn't mean that we're eliminating any standards, but it means that these ones, maybe a dozen, are going to be our big focus that we're going to collect data on, and we are going to ensure that every student leaves our classroom knowing that information. We're going to follow through a practice of instruction, teaching, quick check-ins, formative assessments to see how they're doing. Then we're going to have a common formative assessment where we're going to collect the data and we're going to see where students are at. So we can look at it and say, hey, 80% of our students got this. We are awesome. We can move on. But these 20% of students didn't get it. So we're going to provide some extra intervention time for them to work on this outside of the regular core class. And so how you fit that into the schedule is going to be a big piece. And then again, those students who have already got it, how can we enrich and extend for those students? So those students who need extra time to practice are going to be working on it. And those students who need extra enrichment are also going to be practicing as well. And then we continue the cycle. And okay, what happened next? Ooh, this time when I taught that essential standard, only 50% of my students understood it. That's on me. And so I need to go back and reteach it. And maybe I need to go talk to my teacher team because they had better results than I did. They're back at that 80%, but I'm sitting here at this 50%. So how can we work together? How can I learn from you? How can you help me support my students so that we can get all students to learn at high levels?
Oh my gosh, I'm like listening to you and I'm like, it's so, I have my friend who's actually like my husband's uncle, but we're friends. Like, so I say we're friends. He and I have like talked a lot about what his like teaching experience is. Mm-hmm. And one day I was like, he was telling me about what it was like. They had like a new textbook, mm-hmm. like that, that basically this one curriculum was out. So they're bringing in this new curriculum. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me all the things that he had to do to incorporate that new curriculum to the standard, right? Like here are all the state standards. Mm-hmm. And then, okay, all of these curriculum pieces. And there's a lot of work that goes mm-hmm. in to those lesson plans and that curriculum, right. Standard alignment. There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah.
And so it's just so fascinating to me sometimes when I hear people say, well, like teachers are just in the classroom, like they're just like doing these things. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, no, actually, yeah, it is an art. Mm-hmm. Teaching is an art that some people are so good at, that comes to them naturally. Mm-hmm. And then other people love teaching and they work at that art. Mm-hmm. And they fine tune that art. But teaching is also about science.
Yeah.
In terms of like, especially as you're talking about like this PLC component, right? Like of aligning all the things using the data mm-hmm. to help make informed decisions that connect with the art of teaching.
Right.
It's like, oh my gosh, I'm listening to you. And like, I'm just like thinking to myself, like, gosh, okay, well, they have these PLCs and they're doing this and they get 30 minutes, maybe an hour a week. Mm-hmm. Like that doesn't even I'm just going to tell you, like Alexis Morgan doesn't even feel like that's enough time. Like it feels like such a small amount of time. Like, holy cow. It's quite impressive actually.
Yeah.
That these things, there is just like so much love and work that goes into the profession of teaching.
Yeah.
Like that's what I feel like I'm hearing from you.
Absolutely. So there's a great book called The Art and Science of Teaching because it is just that. It is an art and it is a science. And we've got to put those things together. And I love what you said about taking the standards and aligning it to the curriculum. I think in years past, we would just get as teachers a book and say, this is your curriculum. Just go from page 1 to page 10,000 and just get through the book. And it's not that. There's chapters you can skip. There's things that you can move around. There's things that aren't essential that maybe are still taught and talked about, but I don't need to know that every student knows that before we can move on to the next thing. And so it's making those decisions with a team to determine what that looks like. Because you can look at a state standard. I could probably put 5 teachers around a table and say, here's the state standard, read it and ask what it meant and get 5 totally different answers. And so we've got to come to a consensus as to what that means and how we're going to assess it as a team to make sure that our students are ready. Because if you're assessing it at this really high level and I'm assessing it at this very low level, And we're saying, yep, they all have it. When the students go on, some students are going to be successful at that and some aren't. And that's not intentional. That's not saying teachers are meaning to teach at a low level. It's just that was my interpretation of it. And so we need to agree on what that level of rigor looks like.
Yeah. I'm just like, whoa. It's like early in the morning over here, Emily, and I'm just like, oh, that's a lot. Like it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I am constantly reminded when I have conversations on the podcast about, like the people who participate in education, right? All these different things, that it's a really like layered, complicated, not in a bad way, but it is filled. It's not like fluff. I'm like hearing you and I'm like, there's no fluff here. Like they're doing all these like really important things for our kids. And I don't know. I'm feeling like woof, and I'm feeling grateful. That's what I'm feeling at the moment, Emily.
Oh, I appreciate that, because I'm sure that teachers feel that way, the oof specifically of overwhelming. My greatest fear is that professional learning communities become another thing that teachers have to do. And that's not what it is, right? It should be, well, what can we take off teachers' plates to make sure that this is time for this? Because it is so important. And also it becomes just how we do things. I was talking to a school district and I was like, hey, I was looking on your website. There's nothing here about you being a professional learning community. And she was like, well, that's because we've been doing it forever. And it's just what we do. Like, I don't need to announce it because it's just how we're structured. There's collaboration time built into teachers' schedule. It's part of their contract. And there's intervention time built into the schedule. So there's core teaching time where it's every student. And then there's that intervention time. And it's just what happens. So it's not something we talk about, right? As far as like, oh, we need to implement or we need to do. We just are a professional learning community. And I love hearing that. It just becomes who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
That's so awesome. So when we're looking at PLCs like around the state, do you see that there's more on the elementary, middle, high school level, or district-wide? Like, what are you noticing?
It really depends on the district. I think that's one of Idaho's greatest challenges when it comes to becoming professional learning communities is our schools are so different, right? We've got a school district that has less than 10 kids, and we have a school district that has over 40,000, right? And so it is a challenge. And I keep talking about teams, right? You want to have your collaborative learning team. And that's hard in some Idaho schools because you're what's called a singleton. You're the only first grade teacher. So how do you collaborate successfully when you're the only one? We hear it in high school, especially for our elective classes. Well, I'm the only physics teacher. So who do I collaborate meaningfully with? And so it's figuring out how that works. And it might look different from district to district and even within your district from school to school, depending on how many teachers you have and what contents they teach and really what your demographics of your students look like and the system that you have, your bell schedule. So it really takes that guiding coalition team to figure out what it looks like for you. As I mentioned Solution Tree earlier, they're a big company and they deal typically with big schools and so big districts. And so taking that core concepts and making it fit your school and your system is the challenge that each guiding coalition has.
Okay, so then how does a PLC start at a school? Like, who brings up the idea and where do they have to get, like, who do they have to get buy-in from?
It can start at any level. We've seen teacher teams start it, that we are going to become the PLC and we're going to make this work and figure it out. Sometimes it's, a principal at the school. Sometimes it does start with the superintendent. It really just can start anywhere, and it can start as simple as just asking questions of, how can we do this better? How can I support my students better? It could start as a book study. Maybe there's a great book called Learning by Doing, and I love that title because that's what it is. We're learning by trying something out and doing it and seeing if it works, collecting data to see if it works, to make our next decision. It can be going to a conference to learn. It can just be reading resources online to see, okay, how can we do that? I think a lot of times it starts with that guiding coalition, creating a core group of people to take a look at the current reality of where we're at and what we need to do. One of my favorite things that I've seen lately with professional learning communities is in that guiding coalition, you have the teacher leaders, you have the administrators. I'm seeing a lot of people put a board member on that guiding coalition to learn alongside everybody. And that also means you have an advocate on the school board when the superintendent comes and says, hey, we need a 2-hour early release on Wednesday. I know that that's a loss of instructional time, but it's really important time to get our teachers time to collaborate and prep together and do those data analysis and make those decisions. It might be, hey, we need a couple PD days. And so we're going to add that to the budget so that teachers have time to look at essential standards and break those down and create common format assessments, because all of those things, like you mentioned, take time. And it can't be outside of a teacher's work contract. It's got to be within. So how do we get that to work? And so having that board member on there who can see why and understand those decisions and so can support it when the guiding coalition comes and says, hey, we need to make this change. It's a tough change, but we need your support. And here's why.
Are you allowed to say what school district that is?
I don't know, but I don't know. I don't have their permission. I don't think it would be bad, but I've got one school district who right now is trying to implement intervention times within the high school. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to do that fourth quarter of this year. It's a totally new thing for them. They went out to other school districts who've been doing these kinds of things. They figured out a system that they think is going to work for them. They're implementing it fourth quarter so that they can work out the kinks and figure out what worked and what didn't, so that next school year it is part of the schedule.
It's just integrated in. I love that.
Yeah. I have another school district who did something similar 2 weeks into the school year. They went to the conference, they did some learning, they decided what they really need is some intervention time built into the school schedule, which means shortening some class times, which is important for instructional minutes and all of those kinds of things. But they decided it was important enough to do, and they talked about it. They said, hey, should we wait till second semester to do it? Should we wait till next year to put this in place? And as a team, they decided it was important enough to do it right now, that 2 weeks into the school year, they adjusted their schedule to be able to implement that. And they've been tweaking it here and there to make it a better system.
Oh my gosh, I know some parents in a school district that would love it if their district, like there are some districts out there that find something new and then they wait. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, we'll do that next year because we need to plan and do all these things. And so I know that like for some parents, they're just like, no, we know this thing is great. Mm-hmm. And like we've done the learning, like let's figure out how to integrate it right now so we can start in the process.
Right.
I love that. I love hearing that. I'm gonna circle back to the school board thing. Mm-hmm. Because in 2019, which was one of the years that I was on the Lewiston School Board, the superintendent up there, Bob Donaldson, he gave me, I was like in the middle of my master's program. And it was I was getting my master's at University of Idaho in adult organizational learning and leadership. Mm-hmm. It's a mouthful. And the title, the program is a mouthful name. And so one of the things that I had done in there was to create my own professional development for my board. So then during one of our work sessions, scheduled it, and I presented this professional development to the board. And the professional development really centered around the value of continued learning for school boards and the link between school board learning and student outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what's fascinating now, I'm going to like put a pin that, because then 5 years later, like I used a book, like my professor gave me this book and he's like, hey, this is pretty like newish research, it had only been like 3 years old or something. He's like, here's this book and you can use it. Like it might be valuable for you, like in your program. So I'm using it. I used it for that professional development. And I remember reading it as a school board member thinking like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Mm-hmm. I want the rest of my board to know and see the value of continued learning, right? Like intentional and using data and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, the pin is 5 years later, I'm sitting with a guy who works for the Idaho School Boards Association. And he's like, I'm talking to him and he like had mentioned he got his PhD and he wrote a book. And I was like, wait a second, like, are you talking about, are you talking about this book? And I like hold it up and he's like, yeah, I wrote that book. And I was like, what? And so I was like, oh my gosh, I used your book in my like for a project, and that was pretty cool. But then the thing that like really like is really cool for Idaho is that Idaho has like the school board expert working at the School Boards
Yeah.
Association helping school boards learn, which school boards have to decide that they want to learn or not, right? It's like not a requirement for them.
Right.
But so anyways, I thought that was really cool. So when I gave that, that's like total side note, but when I gave that presentation, shortly thereafter, Bob was like, hey, I'm doing this thing in the school district and I want to give you some of the material because as a school board member, I'd love your input. And I was like, okay, cool. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And so he gave me a book on PLCs. Like
Love
it was
it.
like a book on PLCs and it was something else. And because he was like, I'm going to do this in the school.
Mhm.
He's like, and I think it'd be really cool to do this with the school board.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like right up my alley. I was like so excited about it. I got it. Like, I think he gave me the book like in the fall or something. And he was, we had like a lot of things going on. And then, like with the intention of getting back around to it like in the springtime. And then COVID hit.
Oh no.
And we actually moved down to Eagle and like that was the end of that. But the point being that like there's a value in
Right.
bringing in school board members
Yeah.
to kind of understand and see the big picture because they're the ones governing. And it is important for them to see how some of these programs are like helping on the micro level, but
Yeah.
then also impact the macro level of like the whole school system and what they're doing.
Yeah. Superintendent Janet Avery up in the Potlatch School District was teaching her school board about this and talking about the 4 PLC questions. And their board president was like, we can be a PLC too. And it's like, yes, you sometimes modify those questions. So what do we want students to know and be able to do? Sometimes we change that and say, what do we want our staff to know and be able to do? If you're a superintendent teaching this to your board, what do you want your board to know and be able to do about professional learning communities? How do you know when they've learned it?
Yeah.
What do you do when they don't or they're struggling with it? Like what other things and resources can you bring in to support? So your school board, if they're asking those 4 PLC questions, which hopefully they are, and they're looking at data at their school board meetings, are also part of your professional learning community.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So then the other thing I want to circle back to was the example of the physics teacher at high school. So let's say we've got like a physics teacher, we have them at high schools and there was only one and they have like these PLCs at the school. What does that teacher do?
So like I said, you want to find that meaningful collaboration, whatever that looks like. So it's okay to have a vertically aligned team. So maybe you have your kinder and your first and your second grade teachers collaborating. They can still collaborate around those essential learnings of saying, what do we want kindergartners to know and be able to do so that they're ready for first grade? So when I'm the first grade teacher, I know what to expect that they've learned. I have that data. And then what am I doing to get them prepared for third grade? High school physics might be a little bit different. If it's a large school district, maybe you have a online team. So the teacher from high school A is working with the teacher from high school B and they are collaborating. We have Zoom, we have virtual meetings. Like there's no reason that you can't collaborate virtually. It's a little bit harder and you don't have those personal interactions, but that's not impossible. You can also collaborate with someone that doesn't teach the same thing. We talk about common formative assessments a lot, and it's like, well, how do I do a common if there's no one else who teaches? I've heard it being called collaborative formative assessments. I'm still a highly trained educator, and we might be teaching the exact same content, but you and I can have an articulate and intelligent conversation about that, and you can help me problem solve. You can help me look at my assessment and see if it matches the standards that I'm trying to meet. Even if you're not teaching it with me, we can still have that conversation and it's going to help me. It's about the process more than necessarily the content to have those conversations. So getting creative with it, being willing to try something new or different, and just taking the opportunity to talk through your thinking. I know for most of my career, I was a singleton. I was the only social studies teacher in the building. And I remember having a conversation with myself of like, wow, that's a really good idea. You should do that. But I don't actually know if it was a really good idea.
Because I'm giving myself my own feedback.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I love that. So let's talk about, tell me like I would love to hear a success story. What's like, do you have a success story from somewhere in the state that's like they did this and
Yeah.
they had these types of outcomes and it, created this type of experience either for kids or for teachers or for
Mhm.
school boards? I mean, at whatever level, you choose whatever story you want, Emalee.
Yes, I wish I could say I had anything to do with our model PLC school or promising practice school, but they were off and running and doing these things before I came into this. So, like I said, we had the grant this last year. We had 29 schools receive it. And so all of them have been success stories, but all of them are successful in their own way because it depends on where they were at in their current reality and what goals that they set. So some of them set goals for those system things. We have a guiding coalition. We didn't have that 6 months ago. That is a huge success because the conversations that they're having are richer. They're centered around instruction and practice and student data, which they had never had before. We have other schools who've began implementing intervention time. So they adjusted the school schedule, didn't mess with buses on either end, but just maybe cut down classes by 5 minutes so that we can have that intervention time. That's a huge success. We're going to see successes in things like our IRI scores, in our ISAT scores. We just haven't seen them yet because this is that first year of implementation. So it's all of those little things along the way that are going to build and see that huge success. And we talk about that a lot on my content and curriculum team. We call them mastery moments. Like not everything has to be the Super Bowl, which we got the Super Bowl this weekend. We're really excited about that.
Yeah.
But it's all those little steps that we take towards achieving that and celebrating those things along the way. And so some of the successes I've seen are just schools talking to each other and collaborating more. Teachers tend to historically work in silos. It's my classroom. These are my kids. Changing that conversation to these are our students. How are we helping all of our students? And so just seeing those mind shift changes and how we talk about students and student success are those success stories.
Okay, you really didn't answer my question.
I didn't.
I'm like, okay, let me rephrase this. Okay, so I know, like, in some of the stuff that I do, that I get phone calls for different things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the phone calls I get are tough. Like, people are calling me for something that's hard. And I just had a phone call recently where someone's like, Alexis, I got to tell you what's going on in the school over here actually has nothing to do with our organization. But since you do stuff on the state level and since you got all these other things, I just like want to tell you about it. And I'm just like, ooh, what a mess. Like, and I'm glad that actually doesn't have anything to do with us. But it's not like a phone call that like fills me up, right?
Right.
And then I just got an email from a parent leader over in Eastern Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, hey, this is what we did for this activity. And it was like the longest. She had attached this PDF and it was a super long PDF of like what they did with like all these photos for kids at school. Mm-hmm. And like, that just like was so filling. I like read it and I was like, bless her for sending this today. This just like fills me.
Right.
So you're in your role. Do you have those kinds of experiences?
Oh, absolutely. Just a couple weeks ago, one of my team members and I went and did professional development for a high school around aligning your essential standards to your common formative assessment. And we walked them through the process of, okay, first you got to select your essential standards. What are the things that you are guaranteeing your students know? Okay, what are the learning targets along the way? You've got to kind of have a list of where kids are at, a ladder, if you will, of they've met it here, they've met it here, they've met it here. So you can see the progress towards that. So then what does that big unit assessment look like at the end? And is it aligned to those learning targets and those essential standards? And this amazing teacher, he is a great teacher, raised his hand and he's like, wow, my test sucked. I was like, well, that wasn't the goal of the training, but I'm glad that you had that moment of saying, now I understand why my students are struggling with understanding the importance of certain things. Because I tell them, hey, you don't need to really know this thing. I need you to take notes on it, but I don't really need you to know. I need you to know this thing. But then I had that on my test. So of course they think that they have to know that thing. It's like, I can cut my test down in half because I'm making sure that they know those super important things and I'm not wasting my time and I'm not wasting their time and their brain power on figuring those things out. So it was just this like light bulb aha moment. I mentioned earlier the school was 2 weeks in And they were like, we have to do this intervention. We have to put this time in. And that came from a teacher that was like adamant that this was the most important thing and so supportive of it to be able to get that. And the superintendent sent me an email about that of like, this is the energy we have in my school. This has changed every conversation that we have because we're talking about student data. And so, yeah, it's those emails along the way that are like, yes, this is making a difference. This is changing the systems and the trajectory of teaching and learning in Idaho.
So you talk about interventions, and I was just thinking about how like sometimes, you know, different things are put in place, like, oh, this idea and this will fix this problem. So, right, they get this idea from the district that comes in, you know, oftentimes we have like these top-down things, right? So it's like, okay, we do this, and okay, we got to like stick in this intervention time. Here's the intervention time, and this is what's going to be, and they plop it in there. And then it just is in there, and it doesn't do anything other than like there's a space in this in the schedule, in the daily schedule for this thing that's there.
Yep.
And it really feels like such a waste of everyone's time.
Right.
And what I'm like hearing you say is that maybe one of the reasons, now you're not saying this is me, but maybe one of the reasons that this thing that's in the schedule that's supposed to be for intervention for kids, but really isn't like bringing the results that they want is because they're not having these PLC type of conversations around what is our goal, what type of outcome do we want for our kids, and are we seeing that in the process of this schedule change?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have to do something with the information. So if we're collecting data, but we don't do anything with the data, we haven't really been successful. Same with those intervention times. What's the intention behind that? What's the standard that we're trying to achieve? I've had lots of phone calls over the last year about MTSS specifically of saying, hey, we need...
Wait, what's MTSS?
Multi-tiered systems of support.
Okay.
I need tier 2 intervention, and talking through that conversation of saying, well, what standard are you trying to intervene on? So there's the 3 tiers of intervention, right? Tier 1 is whole group, everybody, all the students should get this information. Tier 2 is only a select group need additional support. And then tier 3 is a even smaller group that needs really, really in-depth intervention and support. So I'll get phone calls that say, hey, we need help with tier 2 interventions. Intervening on what? What's the standard or what's the skill that we're trying to intervene on? We don't know. We just need tier 2 intervention. And, you know, my heart breaks for that because this person is reaching out and they need help. Teachers need help. Schools need help, but they don't even know what they're asking for help for. So until we've identified what the skill is that we need to intervene on, we can't really intervene. We're just whack-a-moling, trying to get those interventions. So interventions really have to be targeted to the skill or the learning that we need students to have. And it can't just be everything. And so it starts with those PLC conversations of what do we want students to know and be able to do before we can start intervening on those.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to give a success story.
Okay.
Because I'm going to get specific.
Oh, I love it.
So yeah. And it's actually my own child. So I'm going to talk about like my own daughter. She's my youngest. And when we were in Lewiston, we were at Whitman Elementary School. And prior to coming to the elementary school, she was at a Montessori school. Like she had done preschool at Montessori, and it was so great for her. And like, it was just like so awesome. It was great for her. She was the youngest. It was just, anyways, I keep saying it was so great because it was, Emily. It was so great.
I'm so glad.
So anyways, but then like she went to our elementary school for kindergarten. That's where she started. And when they took those like, what was it called? IRI at the time, I think. I don't know if it's still called that. But anyways, they had switched it right after she became, or right before. So prior to that, it was like 1, 2, and 3 meant something different. So, but by the time she got there, 1 was just like you're talking about, the 1, 2, and 3 tiers, right? And there are data points in there, like 1 to 30, 31 to whatever, right? And so she had been like right on the cusp, like right on. And the teacher was like, listen, I see her all the time. We're not worried about this at all, but she is, allotted a certain amount of time for this, intervention. And I was like, hell yeah, like give her that intervention. Like
Yeah.
she gets it. Yeah, let's take it. Like I'm going to take it. And I trusted the school and it was awesome. So the second year then, in first grade, same thing kind of happens. And what I noticed about that first grade teacher and what I was like noticing about the school was that there was this great alignment. You're right. They were having, I don't know that they would have called it PLC. Maybe they would. I mean, my principal friend can correct me. But that first grade teacher was so interesting. She came to me and said, okay, your daughter is like on the cusp again. And the reason, let me pause for a second. The reason that I had mentioned that she'd been at the Montessori school was because Montessori teaches letters differently than in our traditional schools, okay? Like at the school. So she had learned it differently. And so that's what the kindergarten teacher was basically saying. She was like, she kind of learned this differently for the last couple of years. So now she's having to make some adjustments. So while she may say, well, she might look at the letter Q and we want her to know what the name is, she's just making a sound.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
Kind of
Makes
like
sense.
that. So they weren't concerned. Anyways, so now we get to first grade and they're asking, they've come to me and they've said, again, she's on the cusp, like she's on the line here. And I was like, okay, I'm like, but as a mom now I know a little bit more and I'm asking some questions. And it was so interesting because the first grade teacher said, she was like, listen, she's like, what I know and have experienced and have seen in her work is that she knows how to do these things. We want to work on comprehension with her. Actually, that's what we're noticing. And so she got additional intervention time. And then she had, when the teacher in the classroom was working with the different groups, right? She's like got these different groups out. She knows exactly what my daughter needed.
Yeah.
And because she'd been going through all of those things. And I remember mentioning it to, I remember mentioning it to the principal because like by the end of the year, it was like, whoa, they had targeted what my child was struggling with. And then they were helping her with that. And I mentioned to the principal, I was like, as a parent, like I'm really impressed because like I read with her. I do all, like we do all these things with her. And also I didn't even like pick up on that. Like I'm her mom.
Right.
I do all these things with her.
Right.
I didn't pick up on that.
Right.
The teacher did.
Yeah.
And in their like learning community together, right? They're doing all these different things and figuring out goals for kids.
Yes.
That's what she had figured out for my daughter. And so the principal was like, oh yeah, she's awesome. That teacher is incredible. The team that they work with, he's just like this team of teachers, they're on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And to me, that's like, I would say that, I mean, I don't know for sure that was a PLC, but to me, that's like a success story, right? Where
That's
we're
a
just
huge
like,
success.
anyways, I'm happy about that one.
They might not have called it a PLC, but they were a professional learning community. And I love that she was using data to determine what your daughter needed and figuring out where the challenge or the deficit was. And parents should be part of these PLCs as well, right? When your student comes home and says, and you ask, well, what did you learn today? See what they say. How do you know if you learned it? Were you successful at learning? You can ask those similar type questions. How did you know that you were successful in learning that today? A lot of students will have what's called I can statements. My guess your student could be able to say, well, I could count to 10, or I could, use the hundreds place value or something like that. So your student should be able to articulate it. And I would love for those professional learning communities to get to the point where they can send that information to families that say, here's what we're working on. This is what students should be able to do, so that you can have those conversations at home. And you're right. You're a parent and you're an amazing parent, but maybe you don't understand those science of reading or how students learn to read, but you can have those conversations of, well, what did you learn? The question wasn't what was taught today. It was, what did you learn? How did you know that you learned it? Were you successful in learning it with your child at home?
Oh, I love that. I love that you just modeled that too. I'm like, oh, that was good. That was good, Emily. You just modeled that for all of us.
Here's your script.
Thank you. I love a good script. Like, tell me what to say. I'll do it. Okay. So lastly, I just want to talk about the state level. So a year and a half ago, the state started like this position. Tell me why and like, what's the goal of the position?
So the why is the former Deputy Superintendent Ryan Cantrell had a vision for it. So he was at a school who needed some school improvement. And so he and his district did a lot of deep dive into what was working and discovered professional learning communities. And so he knew the importance and significance of that to help students grow and school districts become better. And so it was really his vision that brought this position into being. And so when I showed up, that was my first question is, who in Idaho are PLCs and who's doing it well? So you'll often hear PLCs referred to as PLC light. We talk about PLCs, but we maybe haven't gotten to that collaboration piece of it, which is referred to as PLC right. So moving from that PLC light to PLC right. So finding those schools, finding those success stories and how to replicate that. And what we heard from everybody is we have to get that core group of teachers trained and administrators trained. And so that's where we came up with the grant to be able to send schools to a conference to get that base level of knowledge and to just get that fire. Going to a conference like that's really exciting. It also created book resources. So if there's a school district out here who's wanting to get started, contact me and I have some book resources. We know that a book study is not the end all be all of PD, but it's a really good start. And maybe you're just building it for yourself to be able to take to your team. And then we were able to contract with some PLC coaches across the state. So those schools that received the grant this last year have a coach that comes in every single month and provides support and maybe leads your meeting or will help you collect data or organize your data. There's a lot of those things that teachers don't have time for, administrators don't have time for. And so having that support. And then we brought in some PD over the summer that anyone could attend specific to small schools. Like I said, that's Idaho's biggest challenge is how do you make this big idea and make it fit for your small school? So we brought in some professional development centered around that. And then hopefully in the future, we're going to be able to replicate that grant, sending more schools, focusing a lot on those that have little to no implementation. So the school districts, when I talk to and they say, we don't even have collaboration time, those are the ones that we really need to target. And then we'll target those ones that are the PLC light. So how can we just enrich and inform and support to get you to that next level? So we've got lots of plans in the future. Like I said, only a year and a half. So really going to be evaluating this grant process to figure out what we need to change up. We also have a monthly webinar. So district leaders or building leaders can come to our PLC collaborative webinar. It's an hour. It's usually about 15 minutes of a short bite-sized training. We highlight a school that's doing a really great job at it. And then we collaborate and we talk about, okay, what are your challenges? How do you work through them so that we are creating a statewide PLC? Oh, that's my big goal. That's a big goal. So we have a statewide PLC as well, and building just our knowledge and our skill set to be able to support a professional learning community.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing that you're talking. I mean, like I didn't even know that there's PLC light and PLC right. And then like what you're doing on the state level and like the goal of like creating a PLC like statewide. That's amazing. Yeah. I'm excited about it. You got to keep me like informed. I want to be, I mean, you don't have to like send me monthly emails, but like,
I'll just send you an update.
At some point I would like love an update. That's amazing. So at the end of every conversation, I always do like the 2 key takeaways, you know, kind of like, oh, what did we learn today from, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. And so my guests usually ask me to go first.
Yeah.
Unless you would like to go first. Like, what are you taking away from the conversation today? It's super simple. There's just like not complicated.
Honestly, it was the 2 pieces of how a professional learning community helped your student specifically. I think if people see how it helped my student, my school, they're going to get on board. And then talking about the board, how important it is to have that support and that knowledge background to be able to support, because we're talking about systems changes. We're not just talking about a one-time PD. We're not talking about a new thing. We're talking about changing the system of education. And we need our board, and we need student, we need parent, we need staff, we need support for all of those things to happen.
I love that. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Those are really good ones. I am thinking about how you mentioned that it's important to include parents in this process. And that, PLCs are intentional collaboration where they're having informed conversations about this thing that they want, right? And I would love to see, like, I think it'd be so incredible to see you've got like a PLC at your school, and then that teacher, learns how to incorporate the parent, right? Like we have, not that parents aren't being incorporated,
Right.
but I just remember being at it was, what do we call it? Parent teacher conference. And I came and I was asking like teachers some questions at a middle school. And I was like, okay, well, my child's doing really well in your class, and I can see like where the learning is occurring, and I can see actually like there's not any holes, and you're asking some tough questions.
Right.
And I was like, but then there's this class over here that's also another core class that she's not doing well in. And again, it's like understanding content things, reading, and having to answer questions. And she's like, okay. And I was like, what are you doing that's not happening in that,
Right.
like that classroom over there? And she just like looked at me and she was like, that's a really good question.
Right.
And I was like, yeah. And as I'm sitting here right now, I'm having this like aha moment that's like, I don't think that school has like a PLC in a way that's like, like horizontally or vertically aligned. And I'm just like, gosh, that a PLC would really like benefit that environment.
Right.
Like it would benefit kids, right? It benefits kids, teachers, like admin. And I'm hearing that it benefits the entire school community.
Yeah.
So I guess like my takeaway is that I hope more people reach out to you.
Oh, thank you.
So that we can have more PLCs, because I really believe in lifelong learning.
Yes.
And I also believe in the importance of intentionality.
Yes.
That like if we are not intentional about the things that we're doing, they're not going to happen.
Right.
And we can plop something into a schedule and hope, but
Right.
it's kind of like, the movie Grumpy Old Men, he's like, well, you can in one hand, like you can wish in one hand and crap in the other and see which kid fills up first. Like that's a terrible thing. That's so terrible.
Great reference.
But I mean, it's in the movie and it's a funny movie. Right. I think that movie is hilarious. But the point is, we can't just hope for things that are going to change. Like we have to be intentional about changing the things that we want to improve. And we want to improve our school communities for our kids. Yeah. And that's why we're here. Like, that's why we're here and doing these things. So thank you so much for what you do, Emalee.
Thank you.
This is awesome. I love hearing like the newness of this.
Yeah.
And the place, like, the places you'll go. It's amazing.
Yeah. This summer I traveled quite a bit to visit all of these schools that received the grant. So I did a Carmen Sandiego, where in Idaho is Emalee, and would paste it on my Instagram so that people could guess where I was at. And very rarely were they correct, but it was really fun to see and visit, because you really get an understanding of a school community and just the community in general when you're there and you visit. And so it's been a great honor and privilege to be able to see the great state of Idaho. It's been very helpful in my Idaho geography lessons to be able to go out and visit these schools.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, especially on this snowy day, to come in and have a conversation.
Of course.